presentation. This is the first time either of us have done a webinar, so we're excited and we're a little nervous that we don't get to see your faces, but it's going to be fun. We are on speakerphone with our telephone for audio right now, so if anyone is having trouble hearing us, if you need us to speak a little louder, I speak a little more slowly, then just go ahead and type that into the question box and we will address that if we need to, but hopefully this will work. So thank you to Alexa for inviting us to the webinar and for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Katie. I'm the Prevention Education and Outreach Director for SAVA, and I'll talk about what SAVA does in a little more detail in just a second, but I thought we could give you an overview of kind of what our titles mean. So essentially, I oversee all of our prevention programming, which we'll talk about during the webinar. We have 3 main programs: SuperWorld, Speak Up, and Start Peers. I sometimes drop in with Julia to hang out with the groups because I really like hanging out with the kids, but kind of my role is more just to make sure things are running smoothly, kind of take care of some of the behind-the-scenes work so Julia and Dylan, her male counterpart, can really be the superstars that they are. I also do a lot of presentations and collaborative work with other nonprofits in the area and making sure that we can work together to serve our community in the best way. And then Julia.
So I'm a Young Women Prevention Education Coordinator, so I facilitate our SuperWorld program, which I'll talk about, and Speak Up, which is our middle school program, which we'll also cover. And we just got started with our high school program in Greeley, so Dylan and I have been kind of working with that and getting it off the ground. So that's what my job entails, also doing presentations around the community and making sure that we're reaching out to different organizations and community centers to make sure we're reaching all the kids that we can.
And so Julia and I both mentioned Dylan. Dylan Ray is our Young Men's Prevention Education Coordinator, so all of our programming is available to both girls and boys, young women and young men. And Dylan is actually in the dual role of coordinator and student. So he is actually down in Denver at his class right now, so he could not join us, unfortunately. But we do also provide services and prevention opportunities for boys, and unfortunately he couldn't be here today. But I'll go ahead and give you guys a little more information about the SAVA Center. If I can get my Prezi to move, that would be helpful. Oh, here we go. We're going out. Now we're back in. Now we're moving. Okay, here we go. So the SAVA Center is the Sexual Assault Victim Advocate Center. We provide individual and group therapy services for anyone affected by sexual violence, ages 14 and up, in Larimer and Weld counties, so serving a large portion of northern Colorado. We also provide medical and legal advocacy. We have a 24-hour rape crisis hotline. And then, of course, we have our prevention education programming, which is a really big part of our agency, and I think something that is really exciting about SAVA, that we are able to devote a lot of time and effort to our prevention programs in addition to our direct service component, which is obviously also a very large part of what we do here. And it's exciting to see that so many people on our webinar are also in that prevention educator role. So hopefully for those of you maybe who are not doing a ton of prevention education right now, and we're going to release a poll partway through the presentation to see kind of where we're all at with prevention education, hopefully we will be able to give you some new information. And for those of us attending who are also prevention educators, hopefully we can maybe lend some new insights or teach you something as well, because you guys are all experts as well, so we want to definitely recognize that. And like Alexa said, we'll take questions. We're going to pause about halfway through the presentation to make sure to address questions and then addressing questions at the end. But definitely feel like you can type in questions at any time, and we will try to get to them as we're going. So let's go ahead. Oops. You know, Prezis are, I'm going to try not to give you all some nausea. But so our webinar objectives today, we're going to give an overview of SAVA's prevention education programs. We mentioned there are 3, SuperWorld, Speak Up, and Start Peers, and we'll talk in depth about each of those. We're going to talk about what we feel makes our programming effective, and then share some tips for approaching school-based programs, because we know that schools can be incredible allies for us to be able to reach youth, for us to be able to share our message really effectively. They can also present challenges, because schools and advocacy agencies, we often have different priorities, but we are coming from the same place in that we really care about the welfare of our youth and our community, and we're looking to affect a cultural change and make sure that our community has a strong foundation in our youth. So kind of talking about how we can use that common goal to work with schools because we know that sometimes working with schools can also present some frustrations and challenges. And as Julia mentioned earlier, we this year expanded our START Peers, our high school program, into Weld County School District 6, into 3 Greeley high schools. So we kind of went through this process ourselves very recently with reaching out to new schools, new administrators, establishing ourselves in that community in a way that we weren't already established here in Fort Collins. So that's been an exciting challenge, and it's also been really exciting because I think that we learned a lot and we've been able to make some really good progress. So we can share some of our insight from our own experience, and then of course we will have time for questions.
All right, so our prevention philosophy with all of our programming is based on primary prevention, which Katie will talk about in a second. But it really focuses on stepping away from traditional risk reduction strategies that are usually well-intended but have a pretty narrow focus on a really big issue. So an example of this might be the nail polish that some of you might have heard of that came out recently, and it's supposed to detect the presence of any kind of drug in an alcoholic or any kind of beverage. And while I believe that it makes some people feel safe to have that kind of control, it also, we know that in a majority of drug-facilitated sexual assaults, they only utilize alcohol and not another type of drug. So this nail polish only detects one thing that isn't commonly used. So we are focusing more on the root causes of sexual violence. So that includes, the language that we hear a lot in middle school and high school hallways, and media messages that all these kids are getting, and how they treat their peers and how they treat other people around them. So that's really our focus with all of our programs. We also focus on promoting healthy relationships, so giving all of our participants and our students the tools to evaluate what they want in their personal relationships. And if they can identify what's unhealthy, they can more easily identify what is healthy and what they want in the future. We encourage all of our participants to stand up for what they believe in, and really, especially with our high school program, we increase social activism, so we have them get out and talk to community members and their peers and other people in the community. And this really increases leadership skills. So they do a lot of public speaking that really helps them feel confident, not only in themselves, but what they're talking about and the topics that they're covering. And lastly, educating community members is a big goal for all of our prevention programs, because if we have community members that care about our organization, we're able to create a more supportive and resourceful community for everybody.
Yeah. I'm really sorry I keep doing that. I have to keep scrolling over kind of the little bar that comes up on the bottom of my screen to be able to click forward in the Prezi, and then it clicks out instead of just moving forward. So I'll try to leave the mouse where it is, and maybe that will help. But I think I skipped one. Oops. Okay, so we're talking about prevention education, and I know that a lot of us have experience with prevention education, but not everyone might. So I want to kind of give an overview of what prevention education is. So like Julia mentioned, the majority of our programming and the majority of what we usually think of as particularly violence prevention is going to be primary prevention. The goal of primary prevention is to prevent violence from happening in the first place. So it's trying to address a problem before it sort of starts and to remove those root causes of sexual violence in the first place. A lot of times when we talk about with our youth how they can have a role in stopping violence, it can sound really intimidating because I think their mind jumps to when we talk about things like bystander intervention, when we talk about things like prevention. We have these 14-year-olds and they go kind of say, what, you want me to intervene in a sexual assault that's actually happening right in front of me? And we can be like, no, that's not exactly what we're saying. There are ways addressing things like homophobic language in the hallways by, talking to someone if they make a joke that they make light of something like sexual assault or they have a sexist undertone in their joke, to kind of talk to them about that and not let those lower levels of violence that we often don't even perceive as being violent in the first place escalate into things like sexual assault or physical assault or more commonly recognized verbal assault. So really just removing the basis for that violence and making it clear that violence won't be tolerated in the first place. So this can look at addressing power imbalances that might be present either in our society as a whole or maybe more specific to your community, talking about myths and facts about sexual violence, which we know are still very pervasive, and we definitely get some interesting comments from students. Still, we're always learning what the new myths are out there. They're still growing. And also addressing risk and protective factors, which Julia is going to go into more detail, but these are risk and protective factors to prevent sexual violence that have been outlined by the CDC. So increasing sense of self-efficacy, honing those interpersonal skills, creating healthy relationships, decreasing stereotypes, decreasing acceptance of violence. And like I said, Julia will talk more specifically about those. Then we have secondary prevention, which is targeted programming for high-risk populations. So for our line of work, targeting those that are deemed to be at high risk for perpetration or victimization. Of course, the question here is always, how do you determine whether someone is at high risk for victimization or perpetration? And the truth is, I don't have a very good answer for that because that's usually determined by people who are not me. But some of our programming is referral-based, which would allow some of our programs to maybe fall into that secondary prevention line, in that we have students who counselors, teachers identify as maybe having behavioral problems, identify them as maybe being at risk to have low self-esteem, to have low self-efficacy before we see them, and then they refer them into our program or suggest that our program might be a good fit for them. This could also look like programs for individuals, intervention-style programs for maybe individuals who have been arrested for one sort of offense, trying to prevent them from returning to crime in the future, trying to prevent, reduce their progress towards violence in the future, and reduce the impact on violence of those who have already experienced it. And finally, tertiary prevention really occurs after violence has occurred. So tertiary prevention kind of crosses the line into what we would think of as intervention. So things like crisis care, counseling, trying to stop further episodes of violence, and being really more of a long-term response. So it still remains prevention in the sense that its goal is to prevent violence from happening again or in the future, but it's also a huge component is addressing the violence that has already occurred. So now that we have sort of an overview of what prevention education is, we wanted to open up another poll. We know that some of you have already identified as community or prevention educators. It looks like a little under 40% in our first poll, but we want to know what your personal experience with youth-centered prevention education looks like. So we're going to go ahead and launch this poll. And there it is. So we want to know what kind of prevention you are doing, whether that's through your agency, whether that's specifically through your role. You can go ahead and comment in the question section if you want to tell us a little bit more. But you know, maybe you kind of do presentations sometimes. You have one program. You have more than one program. Looks like we have a few people voting. We have some more than one programs. We have people who are definitely in the schools. We have some people who maybe just do things a little bit. We're at about 50% of voting. It looks like most of the people responding do have more than one program, are in the school setting, so that's awesome. So hopefully this presentation feels applicable. We still have a smaller number of people who are not doing presentations regularly, some who are in non-school settings, which community-based settings can also be a really awesome opportunity for prevention, obviously. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, if you have a great foundation with a community-based organization that you've been implementing programming in, that can really be a great stepping stone. That can be a great sort of piece of leverage for you if you're approaching schools to say, hey, we're working with this other nonprofit. We've had a lot of success there. We'd love to bring our program expand to more people. So we're at about 70% of us have voted, 75%. So I'm going to leave the poll open for maybe 10 more seconds, see if we get a few more people. Our numbers aren't changing too much. It still looks like the majority of people responding have more than one program in a school setting, which is really, really awesome. So still hovering around 75%. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share those results quickly. Those should come up in just a second. I'm not sure if they're up yet. But like I said, the majority of people are in more than one program in school settings. We have some people kind of all over the board, and that is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. Hopefully we will be back to our Prezi in just a moment, and we can go ahead and keep moving on. And I think I'm going to have to do the thing where it moves back. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sure you all are experiencing some motion sickness, and I apologize for that. So let's move into talking more specifically about what SAVA does. So like I said earlier, we have 3 main programs: Superworld, Speak Up, and Start Peers. And Julie and I are going to trade off talking more specifically about each of those programs. So Superworld is our program for our youngest demographic, youth ages 8 to 12, and we're really focused on creating a foundation for critical thinking, for sort of getting them started to think about, well, what does it mean for me that I identify as a girl or a guy? Does it matter? Does it matter who my friends are? How should I be treating my friends? Who are safe adults in my life? Kind of setting that foundation and kind of introducing some concepts that maybe not all kids that age get talked about with regularly. Then Speak Up is our middle school program. It's a year-long anti-violence curriculum for 8th graders. So providing more context in those conversations, kind of challenging what maybe their preconceived notions are, some of those stereotypes, some of the behavior that they see, kind of challenging them to step into more of a role of creating the culture that they really want to see in their school. And then our Start Peers program is our high school program, which is a peer-to-peer mentorship model. And we're trying to empower students to become leaders through peer education. So we train students to present to other students and really challenging them that you are in this leadership role, you have this information, now you need to use this information, you need to make your world a better place and kind of see how that goes.
So Superworld is our summertime program that, like Katie said, reaches 8 to 12-year-olds through the Boys and Girls Club of Larimer and Weld County, and also Base Camp in Fort Collins, which is run through a different elementary school every year. These are gender-specific groups, which allows us to address issues that specifically affect both girls and guys, but we also have the really cool opportunity of bringing those groups together and doing joint sessions so that they can learn about each other and kind of the struggles that the opposite gender goes through. It's really fun to watch. We're also able to educate a whole population of kids who we might not be able to reach through the school setting. So we're talking to them really before a lot of these issues are right in their face. So hopefully we're giving them the tools to deal with some of these things before anything occurs. So the focus of this program is whole body health. So that is, we're teaching them self-esteem and positive body image, assertive communication and self-efficacy, how to obtain positive friendships and relationships, and also violence prevention. But we're doing this while also training them for a 5K, and I say training very loosely because it really involves us walking with them for most of the 5K, or in Katie's case, carrying a child on their back.
I did carry a child, and then I had a 12-year-old who blew me away, who was not a very strong runner during training, but decided that 5K was her time to shine,
yeah,
and
it was incredible.
Embarrassed.
But that really gives them the chance to integrate physical health with mental and emotional health, so connecting all of those, so they know that one isn't the one that they need to focus on. It's kind of a whole picture. So this whole program, Superworld, is based off of the CDC's risk and protective factors for sexual violence prevention. So like Katie said, this includes things like sense of self-efficacy and healthy interpersonal relationships. So we're really focusing on communication for that part. So teaching them assertive communication and how to vocalize what they're feeling in a productive way. And we're also supporting the understanding for bystander intervention. So teaching them that an intervention doesn't have to be calling their friends out in front of a whole group of people if they disagree with something their friend said. It's doing it in a tactful way that makes both of the people feel good at the end of the conversation. So saying something like, I really didn't like what you said the other day about one of my friends. It was hurtful to me. Can you maybe not say that? Or something along those lines. So giving them that language. We also support healthy norms for social responsibility and sexist behavior, so letting them know that they are able to help in these issues and they have the responsibility to do so. And lastly, support for men as bystanders and allies in prevention, because so often we see this as just a women's issue, but if we're talking to young boys at an age where, they still think that the world is amazing and a happy place all the time, and telling them that they can make a difference, I think it really helps in the long run. The CDC risk and protective factors also aim to decrease support for stereotypes and myths that promote gender violence. So we look at gender stereotypes constantly. what men and women are told about how they need to be men and women through the media or through their friends or family, and really questioning if those are characteristics that they want to uphold. And decreasing the acceptance of violence. So, looking at the movies that they watch and the violence that they see, and really thinking about if that's something that they support. And we're able to track all of these factors through pre- and post-testing that we administer to each of the participants. And most of the time, I'm not sure if they take those seriously, but we do get some pretty good results from what they learn. And also just seeing them at the end of the summer running that 5K, you can really tell that they have a huge increase in their personal confidence, and they've gained a new friend group that they might not have otherwise. I think one of the biggest pushbacks that we get with our Superworld program is that people often think that we're talking to these kids about gender and sexual violence at far too young of an age. But we know that 44% of sexual assault, the victim is under the age of 18, and that 93% of those juvenile victims know their attacker. So we're giving these kids the education and the resources that they need before anything bad should happen, if it should happen. I know that Katie and I have had similar experiences with Superworld, that when we're doing an activity where we're showing these girls pictures of magazine ads, all of them are able to describe sexualization without the language, without knowing what they're describing. So there's a particular ad with a girl in, I think it's True Religion jeans, but the focus is obviously not on the jeans, it's on how gorgeous she is and her body. And all of the girls were able to describe that the ad doesn't support what the ad is actually selling, and it supports an ideal body image that no one can really obtain. And it also, all the girls were saying that they felt like they couldn't match up to this model, that they would never be as pretty as she was, and they're describing sexualization just without the words. So we know that kids are getting all of these messages really young. They're just not able to say it.
So our middle school program, Speak Up, takes a lot of those foundations that we talk about in Superworld, takes a lot of those conversations and just brings them up to a higher developmentally appropriate level for 8th graders. So Speak Up, like I said earlier, is a year-long anti-violence curriculum. We are really lucky that we are able to meet with the same group of girls and same group of guys in each of the middle schools that we're in. We're currently in 8 middle schools in 2 different school districts. We're able to meet with the same group of guys, same group of girls every week for the entire school year. So I think it's one of the really huge advantages of the program style is that we are able to establish that rapport, that trust in the room. We're able to start off by talking about things like gender roles, like body image, kind of lay the foundation of we as girls and we as guys, we all kind of have these conversations. Maybe we think about this with ourselves, but we haven't really had the time to share our thoughts about it with our peers. But it can be really empowering for the kids to realize that, you know, all of them have had struggles with maybe feeling like they were pressured to act or think or feel a certain way just because they're girls or just because they're guys. They've all had an experience of being told that they can't or shouldn't do something because they're a girl or because they're a guy. They've all had experiences where, you know, friendship has changed over time. They didn't really know how to respond. They didn't really know how to communicate. So really focusing on bringing the group together and showing them the similarities that they have, because we do often get students from different social groups within the school, which can be really, really neat to see that these are kids who see each other every day, they interact in classes, but this is maybe the only time that they've really sat down and listened to someone with a different perspective, and I think that's really powerful. So we have that year-long curriculum. We're working with the middle school population, which I know when I say that I work with middle schoolers, you know, there are kind of 2 camps. Some people are like, oh yeah, middle schoolers are the bomb, and most people maybe do not have quite that same reaction. But I am here to tell you that middle schoolers are the bomb, because they are just at this really neat developmental stage. They're at an age where their critical thinking skills are really just kicking in. Sometimes you can kind of watch the clicks turn, and they don't always quite get there, but you see it happening, and they're so close, and you're so proud. So that level of conversation is really kicking in. They're really kind of forming their own identities, which can be a really great time to be having these conversations about, you know, you get to decide who you want to be. You don't have to follow these kind of prescribed rules or notions about who you're supposed to be. You get to decide. And they're also at an age where they are not quite out of the stage where they're kind of seeking out validation from educators, from adults within the school. So they're willing to listen. They want to be heard. It can feel really exciting to them for adults to come in and say, hey, we want to hear what you have to think about this really important issue, because a lot of times they're told that their emotions aren't valid, they're just going through a phase, but to be able to say, hey, you guys are going through stuff that's pretty rough and can be difficult, and we want to be able to talk through that really ups the engagement piece. We're lucky to be able to work with counselors who are really supportive, and we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about how key that is to be able to have an advocate within the school for us, right? We think of ourselves as advocates, but sometimes we aren't always very good at remembering that we also need advocates, and especially when entering a school-based setting, having the support of those counselors, having them to sort of rally for us behind the scenes is huge. I think having our gender-specific groups does make some of the conversations we have a little bit easier to facilitate. It encourages kids to open up. We recently had, with one of our groups that Julia and I co-facilitate, we brought the boys in for a combined session, and it is crazy how 13 and 14-year-old girls and boys act differently when they are in a room together versus when they are in a room separately. So that was kind of fun, and it was really great because the next week we were able to follow up with the girls and say, hey, did you notice anything? Did you notice you yourself acting differently, or your peers? And they were like, yeah, why do we do that? That's really weird. That's silly. So kind of, letting them come to their own conclusions about teachable moments. Why are you acting so kind of vapid right now that the boys in the room? You were really smart a second ago, and now it seems like that went away. So let's talk about that. So that can be really exciting. And then we also have that consistency and participation, which is really awesome. Speak Up, I think it has a unique way to sort of present it to the schools, is that we are able to help educators through compliance with Title IX and by meeting Colorado State health standards. So we'll talk about this in a little more detail later, but when approaching schools, it's really important to come at it with what can I provide for you versus what do I need you to do. So we can say, we have a program that we would love to implement, and we are going to do this in a way that is helpful to you. So we know that Title IX is a prohibition against sex-based discrimination in education that addresses sexual harassment, gender-based discrimination, and sexual violence. And part of Title IX encourages schools to be proactive, so to not only have policies in place if violence does occur, but to be proactive in preventing violence. And that's what prevention education does. It prevents violence from occurring in the first place. So we can say, listen, I know you're hearing a lot about Title IX in the news regarding universities, regarding higher education, but that sort of attentiveness is going to trickle down into the high schools and middle schools. And I really strongly believe that in a few years we're going to see the same sort of attention paid to how our sort of general education system is addressing and keeping up compliance with Title IX, because every school should have a Title IX coordinator. And you'd be surprised at how many educators don't even know who the Title IX coordinator is within their school. So, that's coming down the pipeline, and we can kind of swoop in and say, hey, this is going to happen, and we can make sure that you're ready for it, and we can make sure you look really good when that starts happening. We can make sure that you're not on one of those lists of schools that are in conflict. We also help meet Colorado State health standards. Some of those are applying knowledge and necessary skills to make personal decisions, promoting healthy relationships and sexual or reproductive health, utilizing knowledge and skills to enhance mental, emotional, and social well-being, and applying knowledge and skills that promote healthy, violence-free relationships. So we're able to also, help health teachers, help teachers who maybe have a teen choices class or a healthy living class to say, hey, let us come in and work this program with you, and we'll help to meet these standards as well. Similarly to Superworld, we evaluate for Speak Up through pre- and post-testing, also using those CDC risk and protective factors. And our CERT peers and our Speak Up evaluations have been looked at by the Colorado Injury Control Research Center, who are really awesome in volunteering some of their time to help us create evaluation tools that were consistent. And now we'll talk about, Julie's going to talk about our high school program, but I just wanted to mention really fast that I just looked at our question box, and it looks like we have a viewer who is just starting with their first sexual assault prevention presentation in a high school through their program, and that's really awesome because high school, as Julie will talk about, is a really key age demographic to be able to reach with this information.
I love all my high schoolers. So the SART Peers program is a student-led program that began in Poudre School District in 1994. So SART stands for the Sexual Assault Resource Team, in which we go in and we train high school students as peer educators for the rest of their school, and they present to their fellow classmates about gender and sexual violence prevention. and how to support those who have been affected by gender and sexual violence. So it's really amazing to see a group of, sophomore to senior aged kids being trained in this presentation, and then they go into their classrooms and they say, hey guys, this is something that I really care about and you should care about it too. It's really incredible, and you can definitely tell that the students respond a lot better to their peers than they ever would to us, which I don't know how to take that. I think it's a good thing.
I think it means that we're already old, which is
really
a
bad
tough pill to swallow.
So SART follows a really effective line of practices. So first, it's comprehensive. So it looks at all of the different aspects in our culture that support violence. So we show this really cool pyramid of violence, we like to call it. So it starts off with things that are more acceptable in our society. So things like the language that kids use, so calling people gay or slut and all of those terrible words that we use to dehumanize people. And also the jokes that go along with that. Again, the rigid gender roles, and then the next step up would be objectification and dehumanization. And then up from that is victim blaming, discrimination, verbal abuse, sexual harassment, sexual assault, physical violence, and then it ends at the top with murder. So it really easily displays how the smaller things that we find acceptable in our society easily lead up to the more violent crimes that we see. The peer presentation also utilizes varied teaching methods. So the peer presenters do like a lecture style for some of the presentation, but they also do interactive teaching and a lot of activities through the presentation that reach students with a lot of different learning styles. So an example of this, before the presentation, all of the peers put up 4 different percentage signs around the room. And then at one point they ask the students a question, and then the students get up and move to which percentage sign they think the question, that they think answer the question.
So I'm going to go ahead and launch. We have a poll with one of our sample questions, and then Julia kind of describe what it looks like when the students are doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll, and we'll see what you think. So
what percent of high school men and women have experienced sexual harassment? So the peers will ask this question to the students, and then they get up and move to the percentage sign that they think best answers it. So you can go ahead and put your answer in there.
Come on, someone say 0 to 25. Do it.
I dare you.
We usually have one of the mentors kind of play devil's advocate with these and go to the sign that's not getting a lot of attention and maybe make a victim blaming statement or kind of push the kids to think about why they aren't standing there. And I think that can be a useful learning tool too to kind of challenge them.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like about 50% of us have voted. Right now the majority are saying 51 to 75%. We have a few people on either side of that with 26 to 50 and 76 to 100. We're up to 60% voting. Let's leave it up for just a few more seconds, see if anybody else wants to respond. Come on, it's anonymous. No one will judge you.
If you guys were high school students not participating,
yes.
I would be mad.
Someone said 0 to 25. Thank you, brave soul. We're still up to 70%. We're almost there. Okay, so you get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and we should be back on our Prezi. So Julia can take it away with what the answer is.
All right. So at this point, all of the students in the presentation have an envelope, and the peer presenter would ask, who has the harassment envelope? And they open it up, and the answer is, in just 1 year, 56% of high school men and women and 40% of high school men experienced sexual harassment in school. And that is in just 1 year. And then the next fact they give is 83% of high school women and 79% of high school men said that they have experienced sexual harassment in the 4 years of high school. So this is a really neat way for the students in the presentation to get involved and to stay engaged. And it also dispels a lot of myths that they believe and that they probably just haven't really heard about or talked about. And what's cool about that fact is the peers go on to say if 83% of the students in school were being robbed, from their locker or whatever, then the administration would do something about it. The community would do something about it. And so if you think about that in the same way as sexual harassment, we should be doing something about it. So The START Peers program is also theory-driven, so going back to those CDC risk and protective factors. It also really focuses on those positive relationships. So again, with the communication piece, being able to communicate your boundaries and your wants and your needs in a relationship, and how to respect other people's boundaries so that you can have a healthy, happy relationship and nobody feels like their lines are being crossed. It's also appropriately timed, so the peers present to 7th grade health classes and also freshman health classes. And for both of these, the students are in this really unique developmental point in their lives where they're starting to think about and kind of play around with different types of relationships and what they want in relationships. And they're also becoming more interested in sexuality and sexual activity and figuring out what their boundaries are. So the peers are talking to the students at a time when they really need this information about how to go forward in their lives. Okay. We also make sure that the presentation is relevant to the students, and we measure all this through a pre- and post-evaluation. So at the beginning of the presentation, they get an evaluation, and then at the end, same evaluation. START Peers also meets those Colorado health standards for middle school and high school health classes.
All right, so we are going to move away from just talking about programming to talking about schools as partners. But I want to pause if anyone has any questions specifically about prevention education, specifically about our programs. And Alexa mentioned that she's going to send out that follow-up email, and that will include kind of one-page snapshots of each of our programs if you are curious about them, if you want more information. And then, of course, we'll put our contact information up at the end of the presentation, and you are always welcome to contact us. But right now, I don't see any questions. So keep writing in if you do have a question, and we will go ahead and keep going. But we'll also make sure to have time for questions at the end. And obviously, if there's a question that comes up after the webinar or later that you would like to reach out to us, then we definitely welcome that. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to zoom out and in again because I can't keep my mouse in one space. So that's my bad. But so we want to start moving into talking about schools as partners and really specifically tips for engaging schools with prevention education programming. And a resource that I find really helpful and that Alexa will send out in that follow-up email is the National Association of Chronic Disease Directors Guide for Public Health Professionals Working in the Education Sector. And I know that the National Association of Chronic Disease Directors doesn't necessarily sound like they might have all the things in common with us in our advocacy work, but it's actually a really great comprehensive guide that just looks at what it's like as a public health agency, what it's like as an advocacy agency to go into the schools and to recognize that we as an agency and they as a school have different priorities, but sort of tips for approaching, tips for making sure that that's a positive relationship and creating kind of a long-standing relationship with the school and with the community. And I think it can be really helpful because especially if you haven't been in a school setting in a while, I think it's really easy to forget how much pressure they are under with standardized test scores. That was kind of the impetus for our title, is that that's something we hear about all the time, is that there's so much concern about those standardized test scores, about pressure to keep up with kind of those arbitrary designations of what is at grade level and what is proficient and whatever else language they use. But it can be really hard sometimes to look past and see the long-term value of programming when short-term the focus is really all on those testing scores. So it's really important to think about how you're going to frame your program when approaching a school. So think about what your school's health policies are. Do a little research. Maybe talk to, if there's someone at your agency who knows someone maybe with a child in the school system or who has a connection to the school system. Kind of do your background research and see what are the school's policies. What is the school talking about in their health classes already? Maybe your school has a really awesome health policy and they are already talking about relationships. They are talking about consent. Some schools have these teen choices class, these relationships class. Maybe you're in an area where you feel like this is a really taboo subject, that sex education is barely existing in your school in the first place. So for you to come in and talk about sexual violence is going to seem really crazy. So knowing kind of what pushback might be happening before you go into that first initial meeting, that first reach out, is going to be really great for you to kind of have that cultural awareness before you approach the school. Think about who within the school already knows about you. Who knows you? Who knows your message? How can you use a personal connection? How can you find someone who's already on board with you to get into those schools? Are there certain classes offered that would be maybe, you know, that Teen Choices class? Maybe you approach the teacher about being a guest presenter before you talk about implementing a full program in the school. Maybe that's your way in, is to establish that relationship and establish yourself as a credible presenter, as an engaging presenter, and then say, hey, you know, I really love coming in and doing these presentations each quarter. It would be really cool if we could work together to get maybe an ongoing program started, or maybe a support group, or something along that lines. Once you've established yourself, once you've gotten into the school in the first place, that initial contact is going to make kind of moving throughout the school system a lot more easy. And as we talked about earlier, framing your program not about what you need, not saying you aren't doing violence prevention, you aren't needing Title IX, you need this and I can give it to you. Saying, I can offer you something. And you know, making it a non-confrontational, but hey, look, this is what I'm seeing, this is what we're looking at, I want to help you to make sure that we're meeting these standards, and to know that we're coming from the same place of, I want to help make sure that we have the welfare of our students first and foremost, and we're going to work with you to make that happen. Think about how you're going to find your ally, that person who's already on board with you. Counselors or health teachers are kind of a really obvious avenue for this, and don't overthink it. Going straight to the principal is not always the best option. If you know that your principal or administrator is going to be really on board right away, and maybe they have a connection with your agency, maybe your agency is already really well known within the schools and you want to expand, then that's great. But those administrators are under so much pressure from so many different sources that sometimes you, as one more person asking for their attention, is just not what they have time for right now. And they are being pulled in so many directions. Figure out who is already going to be receptive to your message, who is already in your corner. And who is going to, you know, approaching them and saying, hey, I know that you're already trying to make sure that our kids get to talk about healthy relationships. Let me help you do that. I can offer something that's going to just enhance what you're already doing. So finding that person. Be ready to be flexible and recognize if it's time to reconnect or to redirect. So reaching out to, you know, if you're hitting a wall with one school, reach out to another school in the district. Reach out to a community agency, something like a Boys and Girls Club. That's going to give you leverage to come back to that problem school or challenge school, I should say, in the future and say, hey, I know that we weren't able to get something started last semester, but look at this program we've been implementing at the Boys and Girls Club. I know a lot of your students, you know, we're working with the same demographic, the same population, and we would love to expand the program into your school. And this is what I can show you about why this program is important and why this program is effective. And just be patient. You know, don't overthink it. If you have a personal connection, use it. There's no shame in using a personal connection to be able to get into schools. And Julia, in a moment, will talk about our experience with our Greeley Star program. And it